Rob, sir, are you dare alleging that there are issues of integrity within the state security apparatus?
Anyways, my guest is
Yeah.
potentially Criminal Sean, friend of the show, has been here before. I really wanted
Hmm.
to talk to you when the Hunter Biden pardon came down,
Yeah.
because to me, I know I have
Mhm.
my preconceived notions and biases where I think Hunter Biden was basically was operating as a foreign lobbyist, and that there's been this cover up through all these institutions to sort of cover that up. But when
Yeah.
something like this occurs, the part of the story that's difficult for someone like me to understand,
Hmm.
who's not a lawyer, is
Hmm.
how unusual is a pardon like this? Because we hear, oh, well, people have pardoned family members before, but then I also hear, but this is a very rare pardon that goes back like nearly a decade and covers any potential crime, even those. So I wanted to talk to you about like what your overall feelings were on the pardon, and I'll kind of tell you what my gut feeling is. And so the first question I wanted to ask is, are you
Yeah.
surprised by this? Is there something, is the type of pardon unusual to you? Or is this something that you think's pretty common, or at least reasonably common, that it didn't raise an eyebrow for you?
Um. Well, I mean, it's when it comes to the idea of the pardon itself, it is what it is, and this is people don't think pardons be like they are, but they do. I mean, it's kind of like you don't think the universe be like it is. Um, when you read the pardon clause, it says the president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for all offenses, for any offenses against the United States except for impeachment. That's it. So you've got one thing you can't do: impeachment.
Mhm.
So, the way I had a professor in college say it, the Declaration of Independence is poetry. The Constitution's an instruction manual. That's your instruction parameter. Congratulations, you've bought a United States government. What can you do with it? You can pardon people. What are the limits on your pardon, the ability of this machine to pardon people? Just can't use it for impeachment purposes. That means I can use it to mow my lawn, slice French fries, cut my hair. Just can't do an impeachment with it. So it's not really like it is a plenary power. It's an unlimited power, and it's one of those few where there's no control, like there's no oversight of it. It's a political power. I mean, generally speaking, pardons are specified to people and offense normally. So be like, Rob, you robbed a bank, and I pardon you for the federal crime of bank robbery that you committed this day, or any bank robberies you committed. Let's say you're a serial bank robber. Or they would say anybody in the Rob Nora gang, I pardon you for that. Kind of like the draft dodgers. The draft dodgers were a class who were pardoned. We don't, anybody who didn't show up, but he'd have to go through and sit there and like scratch out. Jimmy Carter had to scratch out like 100,000 of those. He just did a blanket pardon. Lincoln did that after the Civil War to all the Southern soldiers. So it's not abnormal. I mean, it's just we normally don't. It's just not, for the ones we have seen. I think if you went back through them, I think there's probably some that are a little blankety. Like Nixon's was pretty much anything he did at all from 72 to 74, you're good, or 72 to 73, you're good. Um, it's not. I mean, it's a power. It is a devastating power, in its scope. But it is meant for the president to be able to take care of people in a political way and allow him to act in a political way. So it's yeah.
So I'm not surprised that a pardon occurred with
Hmm.
his son, and I don't even find that to be immoral. I think that if I'm being honest, my son's only
Hmm.
3, so the biggest
Yeah.
crimes he's committed is like stealing cookies and stuff. But
Yeah.
presumably, I become president when I'm 60, and my son's 23, and he's
Yeah.
accused of money laundering or maybe murder, sexual assault, something like that. Maybe you
Yeah.
re-question it, but some sort of financial crime or drug crime or gun
Yeah.
possession crime like Hunter Biden's accused. I'm telling you
Hmm.
right now, I'm pardoning my son. Like,
Sure.
period. End of story.
And that's
So I
yeah.
don't have a problem with that. My problem lies in what I suspect is sort of the self-benefit to Biden, is that the pardon goes back to 2014 and is
Yeah.
clearly designed to
What
sort
what
of
the
bury the story of this ongoing saga for various reasons. One, because we still have a situation ongoing in Ukraine, and it doesn't look good for people that are already questioning how
Oh,
long should we fund that. Second,
so you mean
because
those guys that helped the Al Qaeda guys in Syria,
right,
Ukraine? Those
good
guys.
stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. Then we have the idea of they use this as lawfare against Trump. The first impeachment against Trump
Mm-hmm.
was based on the Ukrainian investigation or alleged investigation that was going to take place. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you have the 51 former intel officials that said that the laptop was supposedly
Yes.
Russian.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reason for people in the establishment, especially Joe Biden, to not want an incoming Trump administration to say, okay, we're going to keep this investigation of Hunter Biden going. Did you read that? Similar to me, that's why the crimes go back to 2014?
Oh, 100%. Yes. It's like in 2014, it's like, what happened in 2014? What magical thing happened? And then, like when you read about like Burisma, it wasn't just Hunter Biden. Like I think it was Mitt Romney had a kid
Yeah.
who was benefiting from that. I think it was not Nancy Pelosi, but forget whoever, but yeah,
John Kerry had a family
yeah.
member, I think, that was involved.
Yeah.
You had
It's all part of the all part of the
former,
hut.
the one guy, I forget his name, but the former dude from like the CIA that was one of the appointment in CIA. Like
Yeah.
you had all of these people. And
Mhm.
even beyond that, like sort of the NGO cutout of the CIA is the Atlantic Council, right? The
Yeah.
Atlantic
Well,
Council,
and the endowment, the
National Endowment.
the
for
national endowment,
Yeah.
national endowment for democracy, like all of it. USAID is,
Right.
they act like that's not a CIA cutout,
Right.
but
And so,
Yeah.
it's amazing when you go back and you look at the story and how blatant it was. Like, just for my audience and yours that might not
Yeah.
know the story, I'll try to do this in under 30 seconds. Joe Biden's appointed under Obama as the point person to deal with corruption in Ukraine. One of the places they say corrupt is this company, Burisma, who is a private company, but it has all of these sort of natural gas leases, etc. that it's getting. It's ran by this guy Zolchevsky. It's considered a pro-Russian oligarch. Hunter Biden gets a job there on the board of directors, despite the fact he has no expertise in gas or with anything with Ukraine. Joe Biden then ends up giving a quid pro quo of $1 billion to guarantee sort of a bank loan, IMF loan, $1 billion of your tax dollars, and said, you're not going to get this Ukraine unless you fire this prosecutor that's allegedly, at least on paper, looking into Burisma. That prosecutor gets fired, and promptly the new prosecutor comes in within 6
hours.
months, drops the
Within
cases.
hours of that phone call.
Yeah, well, within hours of that call, right. Once the new prosecutor came in, it took him less than 6 months to completely drop the case against Burisma, which then Hunter Biden continued to work at Burisma for a year after, made millions of dollars, and all of a sudden you have places like the Atlantic Council that started to get involved in business relationships with Burisma once these cases were dropped. Now, this is what, 4 or 5 former directors of the CIA that's on board with the Atlantic Council. And then meanwhile, when the laptop story comes out in 2020, you have all these former intel officials, many of which work at places like the Atlantic Council, NGO cutouts that are just the public face. They're all of a sudden saying, well, the idea that this laptop's real and all this stuff about Burisma, this sounds like Russian disinformation. It is as blatantly corrupt as you could imagine. And the fact that the FBI chose not to have an immediate investigation, there wasn't an immediate special counsel, etc., going all the way back to 2016, to me, it impugns all of their credibility. And there's been this ongoing battle since Trump came into office to use lawfare to go after him, where they've been hell or high water trying to prevent any investigation into this because it impugns so many people in Washington. And, to me, I've debated this so many times, like with lawyers like Pisco and with other people. And, they always default to like, well, Republicans were in the FBI. Republicans in the House investigated this and they didn't recommend any criminal charges. But to me, it's not just, I think there are crimes, at least the very least of which are FARA crimes, failing to register as a foreign lobbyist. And there's obviously the tax crimes and stuff. But to me, it's greater than just the crimes of Hunter Biden. I don't really care about that. It speaks to the corruption of the system entirely for covering this up.
I mean, Rob, sir, are you dare alleging that there are issues of integrity within the state security apparatus? I mean, the idea of the FBI, fidelity, bravery, integrity, when they're out trolling Muslim guys into becoming terrorists, it's like the meme says, the FBI foiled an FBI terror plot.
Right.
Well, how many times do we see that? Going all like the FBI. When you think about what they've done, J. Edgar Hoover started it, and it uses a blackmail empire. And then through the 40s and 50s, illegally surveilling Americans. And then you get into the 60s, writing letters to MLK, telling him to kill himself and sending him death threats,
Mm-hmm.
trying to undermine the civil rights movement. COINTELPRO, PatCon, like, and then apparently, like, oh, some of these like white supremacist groups are running around robbing banks and armored cars in the 70s. Oh, we might have actually started that. Them screwing up going after the Weather Underground. That one's really sus. Um, everything. And then you get into the 90s, like, oh boy. And then you get into the 2000s with the War on Terror, like, and then they happen to lie on a warrant to a FISA court. Just the one guy, just that one guy. And, he didn't even get disbarred. It's it's a lot of corruption there. And it's, remember, and also those intel officials, 51 people say it was bad. I'm like, the same people that brought you the Iraq War and that there were WMDs. And that Saddam was full of them, and that Al Qaeda was running around Iraq, which they actually weren't. So yes.
Well, they tried to sell that. They tried to sell that like Hussein, Saddam Hussein and Bin Laden were like chums. They hated each other, but that was part of the narrative. They're like, oh, Bin Laden and Saddam Hussein.
Well, I think you're roughly my age, right? I'm
40.
39.
Yeah.
Okay.
40, yeah.
So I remember as a kid, like I'm like 15, 16 years old, and they're like, there was like an airplane body that was sitting there, and they were letting Al Qaeda guys practice on it, like how to do. And it's like, no, Iraq had its own counterterrorism like guys, and they were, granted they were, just utter dog shit because they were Saddam's people, but yeah, they were like doing all that stuff, and it's like, okay, but yes, it's all a scam, it's all a hustle, and yes, FARA's a big one for Hunter. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is another one. With the tax evasion usually leads to two other crimes: money laundering and structuring. Because if you're trying to hide it off your taxes, well, you got to put the money somewhere. And if you put it in a bank, the Bank Secrecy Acts and the Reporting Acts are going to get kicked in. So you have to launder your money to make it clean. And then obviously to stay off the radar for reporting, you structure. And structuring is when you take, guys, and do not do this. Like $10,000, yes, the $10,000 is a default reporting standard. But if you come into your bank every week and deposit $9,000, they're still going to report that,
right?
Because that's suspicious activity as well. Intentionally, and here's the thing, chat: you may have a legitimate source of money, but the fact you structured it, it doesn't matter that you had ill-gotten gains or you were, not intending to do it. It's still illegal. And there's I read about this in my white-collar crime class. There was a guy, he came over from somewhere in the old country, somewhere not here. And it was like you were always worried about the police finding you and banks telling people you had money. So he had multiple banks in the area he had accounts at. And he would give his brother some of the money and they would split up. That way, in case somebody got robbed, that they wouldn't lose all their money from their business that week. And it was a couple $1,000s to like each one of the family members. And they would go run and deposit the money. He got charged with structuring, and they took all the money. Because he wasn't doing anything illegal. He paid his taxes on it. He declared every dollar. But it was still structuring. So structuring is another thing. Bribery offenses. Hunter's penchant for hookers. I'm sure he violated the Mann Act, which means, women traveling across state lines for prostitution purposes. Basically human trafficking. I'm sure he was doing whatever it was when he's out there internationally, cruising for hookers. That can get you in trouble. If you commit crimes like that overseas, you can still be prosecuted in the United States for it. So yeah, he's done a lot of crimes, and those are just the ones we know of. But it's literally every possible crime he could have committed. He could have sold the Chinese a nuclear weapon, and he's immune at this point. So
here's a question I have, just to go. Now, I know this is sort of rehashing, particularly because of the pardon, but I still think that it's important for things to come to light and for these conversations to happen, because we'll get to it here eventually. But to me, the real villain's not Hunter Biden or even Joe Biden. It is the system, particularly those at the FBI, that were pressuring IRS agents and others to silence this story. That, to me, is a far greater threat than the individuals. But going back to the individuals, Joe Biden specifically, one of the most frustrating things that I heard constantly was, well, you have to have a direct money trail for it to be some sort of accusation of illegality or even unethical standard for Joe Biden to sort of, let's assume that he forced the firing of this prosecutor, right, to stop the investigate. Viktor Shokin was his name, the Ukrainian prosecutor, to stop the investigation into Burisma, they would say, well, show me the bank account. Show me Joe Biden's bank account. One, they never got access to Joe Biden's bank accounts. But secondly, is there a process in the law that says, if I do something illegal, like pressure someone to fire someone using my political office, not to benefit me, but to benefit my family, like, because for me, if I'm 60, 70, who cares? I got enough money to, end my days, but I'm really concerned about my son being set up for his life. So isn't it true that you could still use your office in an illegal or an ethical manner and not receive one dime? You're just doing it to set your brother up, to set your son up?
I mean, yeah, there's nothing like to really stop that necessarily, like at the federal level. There's you could be charged with like obstructing justice and trying to lean on people like that. That could become an issue, but ultimately you're the president, you're the chief executive, so you are the chief the police work for you. So if you tell the police to lay off, is it really a problem if you're in charge of the police and you could tell them don't do X? Well, you're telling them because you're in charge of them. So it's a little unique when you get to the president in that regard.
Did you think the initial plea deal that was offered to Hunter Biden, did you think that was unusual? It seemed, I believe it was.
Yes.
It was because there's someone that's not in the law field. We hear these terms, pleas, pardons, and we just have for me, I can't speak for everyone. I just have a general idea well, shit, I've watched Law and Order. I kind of get some idea. But can you explain what was going on with that plea deal and why you would think it was unusual?
Well, the plea deal was basically what the pardon was.
Right.
Because in the plea deal, he basically got immunity from all acts going back to 2014. And that was in the gun case. And it was like you complete diversion, and because of that diversion, we agree not to prosecute. So in a plea deal, you can get an agreement from a prosecutor. We agree not to prosecute you for this crime or that crime. And I get those a lot. My guy has committed another crime. We found it's actually very common, like drugs. It takes you send the drugs out to get tested. It's going to be months and months and months because everybody sends their drugs to the crime lab, state crime lab. So it's going to take a long time. So, we're all the way through another case and we find out about this other drug case. Prosecutor called me like, hey, we got a new one coming. Okay, well, we're taking care of our business here. And then, sometimes we work it out where, there's actually a stipulation saying we agree not to prosecute any other prior offenses committed prior to the date of this plea. So then if he goes out after his plea, if he goes out and commits new crimes, well, then that's on him. So it's not uncommon for that. It's just the way they did it. He basically got full immunity for everything. And the judge said, that's when the judge asked, that's a lot of immunity. What is this meant for? And Hunter's attorney's like, it meant to cover everything. And the judge looked at the prosecutor's like, do you agree? Now, I think they were going to say yes. Their hope was the judge wasn't going to question them. Their hope was nobody was going to notice. And if that was going to be the case, they were going to be able to just let it sneak by and just say, yep, it's all good. But when they were put in the hot seat, they, saved their own butts and said, nope, that's not what it's meant for. So I'm not surprised. It was literally what the pardon was.
Yeah, that's how I read it too. And I predicted, and I think I was remarkably accurate at this. I think what happened was you started to see, because of sort of alternative media, plus then serendipitously at the same time, you had these whistleblowers, Shapley and Ziegler from the IRS, that started to contact people in the Republican Party explaining look, there's more to this than meets the eye. We're seeing connections between Biden and his brother and his son and all these shell companies, etc. I think all of that led to sort of, it made it difficult for the prosecutors to do nothing. Because I think the original plan was just do nothing. And so they appoint this special counsel, and they're like, yeah, and I predicted that inevitably what would happen would be that both before that initial plea deal and then even after it, I said, the charge they won't bring is the barking dog. They ain't going to bring that far a charge. Right? Because the problem politically is if he gets charged with failing to register as a foreign lobbyist, what normies will ask is, well, who was he lobbying to? And
Yes.
then all of a sudden, it's like, now you're implicating not just Joe Biden, but a bunch of people in our political class. Like you said, it could be Romney, it could be Kerry, people on the Republican and Democrat side. And they didn't want that. So I think what happened was they actually did bring, which I thought was sort of the least important charge, this gun charge and a couple of tax charges. And I actually think, ironically, there is a point to be made of maybe that gun charge is never brought if it's not Hunter Biden. But the only reason that it got to that point was because he is Hunter Biden. And they were covering up for the more serious crimes, or at least the crimes that were more serious when it came to implicating people in the political world. I mean, do you think that... So I was able to... I said early and often, I was like, they could bring those FARA charges. There is no chance they bring those before the 2024 election, because that's going to look real bad. It's the same reason that they decried the Hunter Biden laptop before the 2020 election. The entire attack against Trump's like, he's this unhinged maniac that's trying to make money off of horrible foreign groups and trying to get dirt on his opponents. And so when you found out that, I think that's what Trump thought going into 2020, he's like, oh, that's my opponent did exactly what they accused me of. Look at that. And then it got buried. So they weren't going to leave that story come up again in 2024 if it was up to them. That's how I read it, why they never brought FARA charges, even though it was blatant as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, and yes, it does lead to, well, the FARA, the FCPA thing. They're like, oh, so, because Hunter's an idiot. Hunter is Fredo when it comes to things. Bo was probably like Sonny. He was probably the better son before he got, I don't know, depending on Joe when you ask, he died attacking the Death Star or whatever it is he says that happens depending on the day of the week. To him. But then he's left with, I guess I got to rely on my crackhead idiot son to go collect the money. So Hunter was the bag man. And yes, then it becomes an issue of, well, who was he the bag man for? And it's not only that, but it's people like his Biden's brother who, did a lot of built housing in Iraq and hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate deals. And there's a lot of people involved in this. And, that 10% of the big guy, there's a lot of palms that got greased. So yes, that does create an issue of, where do we go with it? What do we look at? Now, when it comes to the gun stuff, normally would anybody else be charged with that? No, not usually. That doesn't mean it's not unusual. I mean, after all, it is a law, and I thought we were like, nobody's above the law, and if we're breaking laws, we're breaking laws. And yes, normally people who get charged with that law are not white guys who went to Yale Law and named Hunter. They're usually poor people and minorities, because that's what gun laws are used for. Gun laws are never used look in your state, look in a county somewhere on a docket, who's been charged of carrying a concealed weapon or illegally carrying a firearm in a vehicle, whatever it is, any type of weapons offense. It's usually not white people. So, but yes, if it wasn't Hunter, would this have been different? Possibly, but it's not like it's never happens. And do I think ultimately at the end of the day it's an unconstitutional charge? Sure. But I also believe if we're going to do equal application of law, okay, well, we're going to equally apply it. Now, was I hoping this got to a court of appeals and Hunter Biden set some good case law? Sure. That I think that there would have been a lot for that, but I do think it was hilarious watching people on the left explain, arguing for abolishing part of the Gun Control Act, that I'm like, welcome aboard.
Right. That is.
So,
there was irony in that. It's so true. It's the same. My stance has always been on all of this stuff. There are tons of laws I don't like, right? I tend to be libertarian adjacent. So there's a lot of laws when it comes to the Second Amendment. There's even questions going way back to the original Russia collusion hoax. Should it be a crime to try to get dirt on your political opponent from hostile foreign actors? I don't think so. I don't think that should be a crime. I might say that's unethical. I don't like it, but I don't think it should be a crime. If the government, if some Russian Kremlin agent says, hey, we have photos of, Donald Trump selling us nuclear secrets, I think that's fair game for the other side to say, sure. Now, if they're trading political favors, that's different, but just getting that dirt. So you had this initial accusation of Don Jr. at Trump Tower, talks to this alleged Russian lawyer, Veselnitskaya.
Yeah, the whole Maginski Act thing.
Right, over the Maginski Act and all that.
Then there was the Alpha Bank servers.
Right. So, but
yes, there was another.
My point was always this. I don't think that should be a crime. I don't think that Don Jr. sitting, because how the hell do we even know what he would have done? Maybe Veselnitskaya says, here's evidence of Hillary Clinton's crimes, and he immediately calls the FBI and says, my God, this Russian lawyer just gave me evidence of crimes.
Well,
we're not going to use this politically, but my ultimate point was this. If you're going to say that that needs to be investigated as a crime, well, we know Hillary's team was dealing with a suspected Russian spy named Igor Dushenko. Why aren't they investigated? Why isn't that a crime?
Even more importantly, they always like to talk about the P tape. You mean the thing that came from Russia?
Right.
That's a little sus. Like and it's funny when they try to figure out. Well, that's different. It's like, okay, well, yes, I'm sure it's different.
And that to me, though, it's like all of these cases. Like, I'll give you another one. Do I think that we have all sorts of problems with whether it be foreign countries, foreign corporations, foreign businesses, or even domestic businesses getting involved in politics? Sure, I think there's a huge problem with that. So in theory, I don't have a problem with trying to crack down on that. I have a question on how we should go about it legally. But if the argument is we're going to start prosecuting people under the FARA Act, like Paul Manafort, I might disagree with that, but what's more of a problem is the selective application. So it's like, fine, if Manafort's going to go down for that, no problem. That means they're one of the worst kept secrets in Washington is that everybody's lobbying for some foreign group.
Yeah.
So throw thousands of people in jail. Let's do it. But they won't do that. It's only people connected to Trump.
Yeah. And the idea of, and people remember like Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother, filed a bunch of late FARA Act notices and did retroactive. That happens all the time. But yes, people violate FARA left and right. I'm also not going to lie. If any of the NAFO bros are out there watching, you know, if you, a lot of the people you like and follow on YouTube and Twitter, I think a lot of people have violated FARA by shilling for salami ukulele land. And I'm sure a lot of people have violated FARA for shilling for the Russian government. I mean, they're like both ways. But yeah, like that's a big one out there. And I guarantee you people have.
And so that's the issue.
And I'm not joking. That comes down to people like me and you.
Right.
If I have these YouTube channels where people like they're doing things or in conjunction with, like, you see like we're doing this and that, and I'm like, it sounds like you got paid. And if you got paid to influence the politics on behalf of the political scene on behalf of a foreign government, that's a FARA issue. It doesn't matter that you're some Yahoo sitting in your room on the computer. That's a FARA thing.
Yeah, and that's my point was they sort of look when you sort of cracked the glass on that with Trump. Oh, we have the thinnest of cases, but technically the bar for the FBI opening an investigation is very low. And so we're going to start investigating everyone connected to Trump, and we're just going to throw the book at them for anything. Oh, we got Manafort for FARA in 2013. And the indicting document from Mueller's team says he worked with Group A and Group B. Group A is a Republican lobbying firm called Mercury LLC. Group B is the Podesta Group, which is ran by Tony Podesta and was formed by John Podesta, who's Hillary's campaign manager. It literally says that Manafort committed this crime with Group A and Group B. So this is as apples to apples as it gets. And they were allowed to retroactively file paperwork. So to me, it's like, okay, once you crack the glass on that, why shouldn't Hunter Biden be charged for FARA? Can you tell people where to find you? I'll post your link, but can you just let people know where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at Potentially Criminal, on Twitter at LawTubeSean.